viewers, welcome to the PSOJ COVIDCASTJA Facebook Live. Thank you very much for joining us again on this Holy Thursday. Today we have joining us some experts, because you know that we bring our experts to COVIDCASTJA. We are joined by Carla Ann Harris-Roper, esteemed counsel, attorney at law, and principal of Employment Matters Caribbean. We're also joined online via Zoom by Michael McAnuff-Jones, who is a management consultant. He is at HR and Management Consulting, the Leadership Conservatory. And many of you have been asking again for Nevada Powe, who is the project architect for the PSOJ Access to Finance Panel program. So Nevada is joining us, and he's going to be bringing us some perspectives today on what has been happening with the project and some feedback from our SMEs. Now, we've conducted a poll because ahead of the program today, we wanted to get a temperature check of what people are thinking. We asked 7 questions of 120 people. And one of these questions was, do you understand the difference between layoff and redundancy? 63% of the respondents said that they understood the difference, and 38% said no. Carla is still going to go through the differences today, so even those who think they understand the differences, you'll get some clarity on that. Do you think people can be as productive working from home as they are in the workplace? 80% said yes, and 20% said no. The third question, has your boss been open with you about what is happening to the jobs at your organization? 53% answered yes, and 47% answered no. In fact, today we're also going to be talking about communication, the importance of transparency and communication and collaboration. Are you worried about losing your job due to the COVID crisis? 50% said yes, and 50% said no. Would you take a 30% reduction in salary to keep your job in this post-COVID environment? Our respondents, 40% said yes, and 60% said no way. What is your biggest fear now in this post-COVID environment? 86% said getting sick, and 14% losing my job. People are worried about catching COVID. So that's why we have it, Tana we yard. If you cut back as far as possible, could you last on your savings without a job for 2 months? 67% said yes, and 33% said no. These are some very interesting responses, Nevada. Yes. Any thoughts on these responses?
Absolutely. It's actually heartening in many ways. Obviously, it's probably somewhat of a skewed group of people who are on Facebook. The people who are on Facebook following the PSOJ SME website are of a particular kind, right? My guess is there are a number of people who don't necessarily feel as comfortable with those situations and concerns about the job and so on. What we're hearing from the SMEs generally is what I would call the beginning of an understanding of what's coming. If you would remember 3 weeks ago at this point now when we started the show, right? In many ways we were talking about what was to come. We had just begun the semi-lockdown,
yes.
But probably in most SME cases, some revenue was still coming in, the receivables were still coming in, there wasn't yet that sense of lockdown.
Yes.
I think what's happening now is that there's a realization that, oh no, this is real.
Yes.
We had a situation, for example, that one of the banks that we spoke to said last week about little over 100 SMEs called in to try and get some kind of support. Now, if you think about the infrastructure of the bank, right, they're not used to 100 people calling, quote unquote, at once, calling, emailing, etc., etc.
And so, as SMEs.
As SMEs, right. So what you're finding also is that some of the SMEs are getting frustrated because the infrastructure is not necessarily there to be able to respond. We at the PSOJ said, be persistent. It's like if you are sick as a patient, you can't get through to the doctor. What you do? Cause and complain that you can't get through to the doctor?
You keep at it.
You keep at it. Remember we talked about you have your story. Now you need to get in touch with the banker to address what it is that you're doing. The other thing that we're hearing now, and especially those employers who work with people for a long time, who have had employees for a long time, it is also an emotional time, right? So the issue is not only about the legal issues, which of course we will get to today, but there's a fact that, Miss Janet worked for me for 10 years, right? And the awareness of Miss Janet's situation, that she has kids, that she's a single mother, whatever the narrative is, and a recognition that how I navigate through this as a small business person is very much going to be impacting on my workers. Yes. We will get in further in the show about the whole issue of the redundancy versus the layoff. And of course, that talk about the 120 days. The 120 days is crucial because the SMEs are recognizing that even if you do the layoff for 120 days, as they look forward, especially in an industry, for example, like tourism, where the airports are locked, and even if the airports were open, I don't think anybody's necessarily traveling at this time, they're saying to themselves, in 120 days, when I have done the layoff, and now I could be facing an issue of redundancy, because I don't actually believe that my situation as a hotel is going to improve in 120 days. Yes. So what should I be doing, communicating, thinking through preparing in 120 days for that situation, for the situation to arise? So what I'm hearing is basically the realization that this is real. This is real. This is real.
And it's a real that we don't have an end date for when things get back to normal.
Absolutely.
So we're figuring it out. So it's like you're flying the plane and you're trying to fix the plane in the air while it's flying.
But I do want to say today is also an important day from the perspective of the benefits. Today, the government's care benefits have actually opened. The online system has opened. I want to big up eGov, Maurice Barnes, because to be honest, again, it's a thing we've never tried that. And in a single day, we've opened the platform to all of these people. And for the most part, the reports we've been hearing are actually reasonably pretty good, right? Yeah. I'm not saying that there aren't any frustrations and so on, but the fact that the number of people that are trying to get online to try and get benefits now is
that they're able to
exactly is actually quite impressive. Yeah. Even if, by the way, for those of these are SMEs, right? Even if you yourself are not eligible for the benefits, some of your workers will be. So we urge you as part of this process to also look at the care packages and just see
so
what you can align.
Too, because you may be wondering, I need some clarification on the care program. Next week's program, we're actually going to be looking in depth on the care program. We would have then had some feedback on any issues with it and any questions.
Absolutely.
And we'll have the experts to talk about the care program. So Carla, one of the key things that we have been pushing is that in dealing with your employees, this is a time for compassion, it is a time for collaboration, and it is a time for open and transparent communication. And as Nevada mentioned, there are several persons with businesses that they've had people working with them that have helped them to build these businesses. They are core, they are family to these businesses, and people are scrambling. So this is an unprecedented situation for many reasons, because all of this has transpired over like the last month.
Yes, absolutely.
And usually with a hurricane, we know that in 2 days, we'll be cleaning up the place and getting back into normalcy. But we don't have an end date with this. Now, from a employment law, labor law perspective, and labor law is one of the most complicated areas of the law, which is why we don't have a lot of experts in labor and employment law, because there's so many issues to grapple with. We have various legislation. So we will not today try to give you the top line. We are having a conversation, a layperson conversation, to help guide you and guide you as you navigate what decisions you make with your employees. I actually want to start with a conversation, the difference between laying off and redundancy, because the conversation is a little loose with how we use them. So can you tell us a little bit about the difference between layoff and redundancy and the things that an employer has to take into consideration in utilizing either of these remedies?
So Rochelle, it's so very important, and I think you've laid it out clearly, that it's not just talking about black letter law. We're talking about a relationship that is governed and guided by the law.
Yes.
And in most of the labor laws, they set minimum standards. Labor lawyers call it the floor of rights. So it's a minimum standard below which you shouldn't go, but you're always encouraged as best as possible to see how much more you can in the context of finances and the particulars of your part of the business.
Yes.
So as it relates to the layoff, both of these are, the layoff and the redundancy are both governed by the Employment Termination and Redundancy Payments Act.
Okay.
Right? And we call it the ETRPA.
Okay.
For short. So both concepts are governed by the same act, and in fact, one could actually lead to the other.
Okay. And for those who don't know, when we say things like statute, act, and the legislation is the law. The law as written and passed by Parliament. That's what we're talking about, the law.
Right.
Yeah.
So with a layoff, under Section 5A of that particular legislation, it sets out those kinds of provisions that guides the employer.
Okay.
So I heard Nevada talk about the 120 days and so on. One of the main things I want to speak on firstly is that layoff is not a termination at the first instance.
Okay, so when we say layoff is not a termination, for an SME, it means that when you lay off the person, they have not been dismissed. They're still your employee.
Yes, they're still on the books.
They're still on the books, okay? So how does that work?
Okay, so you can do a layoff without pay.
Okay.
So what it means, therefore, is that you continue to be in employment, but you are not necessarily required to be at work. You are still considered an employee. And with that, you are able to, at the end of the day, decide a particular position when we get to that point.
Okay. Let me ask you a question, Connie. Yeah. Can the person still get health care, for example, if we had offered health care before?
Well, that will depend a lot on what actually the employer is able to do.
But if they are able to provide the health care, they could keep the health care in place.
Encouraged to do so.
Yes.
Because you remember, most of these health care plans have contributions by the employer and the employee in the premiums.
Yes.
Okay.
So the employer would have a particular payment and the employee would have. If you're not being paid, then you wouldn't have the capacity to make that contribution.
Okay.
And so in that sense, we would encourage, if that is one of the things that an employer can do, to continue making the whole payment
for health.
For the health care.
To the health provider so that the coverage can continue.
Yeah.
That is something that I say we should encourage, especially since why we are off is the fact that there could be an illness because of the COVID.
And also, when the employer chooses the route of laying off, the employer can still make some kind of payment to the employee?
Yes. So you can make some sort of payment.
Even a stipend?
Yes. And you could also ask, the employee can also be asked for limited periods to also come in and do some work.
Okay.
Right.
So I think the key for persons to understand that the concept of laying off is in circumstances where the business has pretty much ceased to operate or business has slowed down. So an employer could take a decision to lay off all the employees or some of the employees, and over that period of time, the employees are still employed. So the service, your work, lose your work, is just that you are laid off at the time. And as a part of the compassion, employers could do things like keep the health coverage going during the time, and where possible to provide some kind of stipend. Nevada, from what you're hearing on the ground, in terms of laying off, what kinds of issues and questions you hear coming from SMEs? Well,
the biggest issue now, especially in the tourism industry, is what I mentioned before. The layoff, as I understand it, according to the law, is for 120 days. At the end of the 120 days,
what happens?
Again, I'm in a hotel. To be honest, I don't see myself, for example, opening in 120 days. I don't necessarily, at that point, have the cash to pay for a redundancy. I mean, we want to talk about what a redundancy is exactly. But how do I, as a small hotel, now navigate transitioning from 120 days layoff? Say I can manage to keep my workers on health care, give a little stipend, and 120 days though,
what happens?
What happens? What happens?
So I think that segues very nicely, Carla, into a discussion of now what does redundancy mean?
Yes.
So the redundancy situation, there are three types. One is loosely called medical redundancy. We're not going to touch that, but just for information, if there is an accident or a disease coming out of your employment and you're not able to continue working, that could be a redundancy situation. Now in this case, there are two other areas where the employer ceases to operate entirely, close down, lock down.
Lock the business, lock down.
Or the needs of the business for the service that is being provided by that employee diminishes, or is expected to reduce.
So in other words, that role doesn't exist anymore.
Or you may still have the role, but say you had 10 cashiers.
No.
The business is contracted. So you don't.
So you just need 3 cashiers. Right. So you made it determine that these are the 3 persons that I will keep in employ, and these are the 7 persons to be made redundant.
In those roles, you don't need as much. So it's diminishing. Right? Of course, there are some other qualifications. So the employee should have been in employment for at least 104 weeks, 2 years.
2 years, okay.
Continuously. Yeah. You have to have the provision that I just spoke of, and you don't have a suitable alternative for them, know that those roads are going away.
Okay. And with redundancy, can you just give us an idea what kind of calculation is done for a redundancy payment in general?
So if you have just the minimum standard by law, that would be 2 weeks pay per year up to your 10th year of employment. And after that, from the 11th year onwards, you'd get 3 weeks pay per year. Okay. Now in some places, if there are other arrangements like a union, for example, or contractually, there could be a greater amount, but that's the minimum standard. The minimum
is 2 weeks per year for each year of service.
Yes.
Okay.
And after in the 11th year, 3 weeks per year.
Okay. Now, Nevada, we were speaking offline about the different types of workers.
Yes.
So what Carla has been talking to us about the employment termination and redundancy law, which presupposes that we're talking about employees. And I think one of the key things that we have to do on this show is to have a discussion of the different types of workers.
Yes.
You mentioned to me seasonal workers in the tourist industry.
Yes.
So we have persons who are seasonal workers. We have persons who are casual laborers. We call them all kinds of things. We have persons who are independent contractors and are not considered by the business as employees. And then you have persons who are employees of the business getting health care, benefits, pension, etc. Now, Carla, I find sometimes we use the terms very
mixed
loosely.
Up. Yes.
And the provisions, the benefits, the rights are different for different types of workers. So can you just give us in summary form so that our viewers, and I know because this is an area of law that whole case law is on, but in its simplest form, what are some of the considerations in determining if a person is an employee versus an independent contractor? And are there different considerations for like seasonal workers? So we have persons who are watching from the tourist industry, and they will have workers who will work during the peak season as seasonal workers. What are some of the different considerations for the different categories of workers?
See, one of the main challenges we have, Rochelle, is that if you call somebody an independent contractor, they aren't necessarily that in law.
You're just calling them so.
Right.
Interesting, yeah.
Yes, because you are calling them an independent contractor, but as a matter of fact, what they are doing equates to being an employee or a worker.
And what would make that, what action would make it when you, beyond calling them?
All right, so the independent contractor is someone who is in business on their own account. So they are in charge of, they provide their own tools, they pay their own taxes and statutory deductions. They are not necessarily under the quote-unquote control of the employer. They're not subject to discipline, those kinds of structural issues, right? But when you're talking about the employee now, that's different. You have a PAYE, for example, obligation to deduct tax from source. Right? They are under the control as to discipline, hours of work, management, and so on. And therefore, what has been happening, unfortunately, in order to sort of cover or exclude some of those benefits that are provided by the various pieces of labor legislation, some persons are termed as independent contractors, but they are not necessarily, in fact, independent contractors. So you have an issue there to navigate. And then, of course, we have the infamous or famous contract, people who work on contract. And that's what I believe we all mean in terms of somebody working on a fixed term contract for a particular period of time. Those persons can very well be employees or workers by virtue of the law. It's just that they are there for a specific time frame, as opposed to the quote-unquote normal employee that is on a contract indefinitely. You know, they continue until they resign, or they reach retirement, or they are terminated.
So it's important then, because under the legislation, what the law says is that the person is in continuous employment. So they're working with you without any break for 104 weeks, which is pretty much about 2 years.
Yes.
So what happens sometimes is that employers say that people are on contract, or they are just a worker, they're not an employee. But basically, if it walk like a duck, quack like a duck, is a duck.
No, you're
so what happens is that what the law is going to look at is, have you been treating the person as an employee? If they were on contract, did they go on any contract break? Yes. So if they've been working for a continuous period of just under 2 years, then it is highly likely, given other circumstances as to how they're treated, what benefits they get, they didn't get any break in the time, they were getting vacation leave, etc.
They weren't working for anybody else.
They weren't working for anybody else. That these are some of the considerations that may make persons as such qualify as employees. And employees are who are able to avail of redundancy payments. So that is something. So we've looked at layoff, which is a temporary suspension of service. Not a suspension where you do something bad, but the business now has ceased operation or has slowed down. Carla, another question about layoff though. When somebody is laid off, how do you give them notification? Do you have to have a meeting? Do you write a letter? How do you inform an employee? Because they would need to know. You have to have some kind of notification.
And it is best, especially in these circumstances, you know, that you formalize that.
However, where we just say to people, we are sending you home. Without nothing more. Just we are sending you home. It needs a little more than that.
Yes, and you know, with the thrust that we are seeing in terms of small businesses, you know, coming under the formal umbrella, this is just one more thing that would help you to, you know, learn how to formalize.
Yes.
When nothing beats that communication, talking with your folks, explaining to them, because they are on the front line, you know.
Yes.
They can see that no customers coming through the door. They can, some of them, they can see what is happening based on the nature of their jobs, that their revenue is down.
Yes.
They can see it.
Yes.
So nothing beats a good communication field, well, as far as you can do it in these times. But explaining to a degree what is happening.
Yeah.
And once you've done that and said, listen, by virtue of all of these things, we are not going to be in a position to keep you on continuously at this point in time. And we have some options available. And the layoff is one such option. You will continue to be on the books. We may be able to give you some amount, whatever it is, during the period. And that doesn't mean it's still not layoff.
Yes.
Right? And we may be able to call you back. So for example, you know, you get a little contract to do X, Y, or Z, and you need some help. You can call back
the person.
Recall them during the period for a short time, and then you send them back, depending on what is happening.
Okay.
Right? And then you formalize when you are telling them. So your question about how you do this notification, there's no quote-unquote notice, like, you know, if you're terminating what you would give. But I think it is recognizing that these things happen so quickly. See what happened in this case.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So as best as possible, as quickly as possible, you have that conversation and then you formalize it in writing. That doesn't have to be a big, you know, book.
Yeah, so you don't need a lawyer for it. It is really just setting out
and clarifying.
clarifying. These are the circumstances.
I wonder if we could bring Michael
in.
No,
I was actually wanting to bring Michael in at this time because we are also going to be, we also need to look at things like what are the different types of options. So there's layoff, there's redundancy, but there are other options. But Carla, you touched on communication and the importance of communication. So Michael, I actually want to bring you in on this whole point of communication and transparency. What are some of the key things that business owners need to be considering in their communications with their teams at this time?
Right, Rochelle. So thank you so much. Before I kind of jump into that, I wondered whether Carla would want to comment on the issue of if a redundancy is found to be unavoidable, you know, because the business has made an assessment that even if we resume for the next year or two, we're going to be operating at you know, at a lower level of scope, because that's, you know, all of these things are possible. And you know, on this compassion issue, I mean, I take the view that for a small business, the compassion conversation has to be two-way. You may have a small business owner who is financing their business, their working capital through bank finance and family loans, and they may actually not be able to feed their own families. So it's not just the employees. This compassionate conversation has to be two-way. But in the event that a redundancy is considered unavoidable, perhaps Carl could comment on, you know, is there an opportunity for an employer to negotiate an extended period to pay these monies? You may not be able to afford it today, but I think that's an interesting thing that people may want to know. You know, once the notice period has expired, do I have to pay now? Am I liable if I don't pay now? You know, how much time do I have? Can I negotiate?
And I think, Michael, Nevada, you actually had that question earlier. So Carla, if you can just give us a synopsis of, at the end of a layoff period, for example, the 120 days has passed, a redundancy kicks in. Does the redundancy need to be paid on the 121st day?
All right, so a couple of things. After the 120 days, the employee has the right to elect whether or not they wish to be made redundant.
And elect is to choose.
Right.
Yeah, Carla is esteemed counsel, so she used them word there.
Right. All right, let me break it down.
Yeah.
They can say, listen, I don't see where this is going, and I have been out here, I haven't been earning, I really need to see what next I can do. Right? So there's a process. So after the 120 days, or whatever the period that they choose, 14 days, they give notice that they wish to choose to be made the position.
So that's the employee giving notice to their employer, giving 14 days notice.
No. So the notice is 14 days. So between 14, not more than 14 days, and not less than 14 days, sorry, but not more than 60 days before the dismissal will kick in. And at that point, the employer can say, hold on, I can find something for you. I'm going to recall you.
Okay.
If they recall them, this redundancy is off the table.
All right.
Right? No. At that point,
Sorry,
also,
can I be recalled for something at a lower salary? Or it has to be at the same salary that I was getting?
It's a question of whether or not that recall is suitable. Suitable.
Yes.
So it's not just a salary issue. It could be a variety of issues mixed together. So it's not only salary that you would look at to see if it's suitable.
Okay.
So there's
they call it a suitable alternative.
Okay.
The employee can decide that this job, for example, has more, more oomph or profile.
Yeah.
And so
or it is actually a job that I can take.
I want it.
Yes.
Right?
Okay.
But also the employee can also choose and say, listen, I am a loyal employee. I see the light at the end of the tunnel. I want to hold on a little bit more.
Okay.
And wait it out. Because I want to be a part of the business resurging like the phoenix.
Yes.
So they can also say, I will wait.
Yes.
I am not choosing to say I want to be made redundant.
Right. But now to the point though, because we keep going just around it. So the person decides they do want to be made redundant, but the situation of the business, it cannot afford to actually pay them. I haven't had any revenue for the 3 months or whatever for the period of time. I cannot pay. Is there any possibility of me being able to delay the payment?
Well, the law does not specifically state
when the payment should be made.
Okay. So you can acknowledge the fact that a redundancy situation is there and it is due, right? But the law doesn't say within 10 days.
It must be paid.
Right. It's open to there.
Yes. Again, I think this is a crucial thing for the SMEs to understand, because right now I had some discussion with some hoteliers in the last few days, because tourism is one of those, that industry it just collapsed overnight basically. And many hotels, as you know, especially the smaller hotels, is season to season businesses that they have. And I will tell you what's also happening with a number of hotels. Even though there were a number of people who made bookings, 1 month from now, 2 months from now is my vacation, many of those people have called and said, hey, I'm not coming, so I want a refund.
The borders are closed.
They maybe can't come.
Yeah, the borders are also closed. Exactly.
So you're finding that a lot of small hotels now are actually in a cash crunch.
Yes.
So even with the best of circumstances that they would like to pay the redundancy, they could find themselves that they are not able to.
Yeah. But the fact is that the law does not stipulate the time period for the payment of redundancy. It is important to understand, though, that the liability for the redundancy does not disappear.
Yes.
You will still have the liability for the redundancy, but there may be some wiggle room and some time for that redundancy payment to be made, because the law doesn't address that. So that's an important point. So Michael, to you now, and the whole matter of communication, and what is some of the important communication that employers should be having with their teams at this time?
Great. So let me pick up where we just left off, because I wanted to, the advice of Carla, that's the advice we gave us HR manager, and of course, I'm part of the Human Resource Management Association of Jamaica. So that's the advice we give, to make sure that it's understood that there is no provision in the law for when this is to be paid, like when lawyers answer those questions. But what's important though is that they acknowledge and that there is communication around the fact that we understand that we have a challenge here, and we're going to have a conversation and agreement around how we could make arrangements to delay the payment. But that has to be properly communicated, and it's an important conversation to be had. The worst thing to do is to actually effectively make people redundant and not communicate with them on what you're going to do with the payment. So that's an important part of the communication.
Michael, I just want to switch your conversation because as we talk about communication. So we mentioned layoff, we mentioned redundancy. People are also asking questions. What other alternative arrangements can I make? Can I have team members come in 3 days a week? So normally they would work 5 days a week. Can I have them come in 3 days a week? Can I have a conversation about reduced salary over a period of time? Can you tell our viewers some of the options that may be available to employers during this time that will help with for that collaboration and keeping people in their employ during the time?
Right. So Rochelle, there are opportunities available here. What we call a reduced work week, where you can ask an employee to work 2 or 3 days per week, or you work every day, but you work 20 hours per day for the 5 days. So you can do less days per week or less hours per day. That's effectively a reduced work week.
Okay.
And that allows you to reduce your cost, keep people employed. If an individual has an opportunity, for example, to use the rest of the time to do some online teaching, to teach English online, for example. There are lots of opportunities to teach English online, which require people to be available at a certain time of the day. So a reduced work week
can be a win-win for.
But I think an employer could look at the opportunities in reducing the work week. Say to people, here's something you can do with the other time that you're not going to be working. Okay. So that's one. The other opportunity is what we call a rotation, where you may have 10 employees, and you want to, you could suggest to your employees that a couple of you work for 2 weeks, and then you're off 2 weeks, and another set are working for the 2 weeks that you're off. I've seen this employed by a company in the bauxite industry many years ago, where people work for 6 weeks, and then they were off for 6 weeks, and another set worked for 6 weeks.
Okay.
So again, that's reducing your cost over time.
And it's keeping more people in work.
Managing your cost. You had a question?
No, and I said these things actually help to keep your staff engaged with you, even though it's at a reduced payment, but you're actually still keeping people as much as possible.
Absolutely.
Working and keeping your business going.
And in the current dispensation in which we live, I mean, there are opportunities for people to use their off times to do other things. You know, I've seen lots of students. I mean, my own daughter, when she was at school, I saw her teaching English online. This is something she wanted to do. So I think there are many opportunities for people to do stuff in their off time. It's an opportunity for us to educate our staff on what can be done. The other opportunities that exist for dealing with staff, and I want to go back to redundancy very quickly, and people's contracts can be assigned. Everybody may not be affected the same way. So I think there's an opportunity to reassign a contract to maybe another business in a little group of companies, or negotiate with employees to reassign the contract to maybe a connected employer. You have to get advice, for example. But one of the things I've seen large companies do, for example, in Jamaica, is they know they're going to make people redundant, and they begin to scout around for jobs for their own staff. And I've seen it. I don't want to call companies' names, but it has been very successful. I certainly, in my previous life, employed people out of those arrangements.
Yes. So
contracts can be reassigned. I've said reduced work week. I've said part-time hours.
You talked about rotation.
Rotation. What is also possible?
Sorry, Michael, one quick question. When you say reassigned contract, would therefore the redundancy due not become an issue? So if I, for example, the person is working for me, but I then am able to reassign the contract to Rochelle, do I then avoid the redundancy because I reassigned the contract or no?
So let me jump in from a legal, because Michael, I don't want you to get tied up with this one.
Okay.
Because in the reassignment, there are some other issues to consider.
Okay.
Because there are certain things that will in fact trigger a redundancy with the reassignment. But I think Michael's overall point is that where redundancy is concerned, there are still mechanisms, and reassignment is one of them.
Yes.
It's just that it has to be done correctly. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
so,
viewers who are just joining us, Michael, just give me 1 second. I just want to remind our viewers who we have with us. We have Michael McAnuff-Jones, and he's actually talking to us now about some of the options that employers can use. Michael is an HR practitioner, an expert HR practitioner in human resources management consulting, and has several years experience. And we also have with us attorney at law Carla Ann Harris Roper, who has been going through some of the legislative provisions and also how to apply them in real life. And of course, we have Nevada Powe, who is the project architect for the PSOJ AFFP, that's the Access to Finance Panel project. So Michael, just to segue a moment, when an employer has considered these various options, can you tell us a little bit about the option of working from home? Because I know our viewers are very interested in when you exercise that option, are there any special considerations? Carla, we're going to come to you too if there are any special policy and legal considerations. But what kinds of things does an employer need to be thinking about now where their persons are working from home?
Right. So first of all, the technology needs capacity that is going to be required. There are people who have restrictions on which devices you can use. But to the extent that people may be beneficial for people to work from home, an employer could get technology advice to ensure that people can use their own devices, so that you're not restrained on a policy that says you have to use a company device. You could allow employees to use their devices, and you put your own security arrangements in place to allow that. You typically want to make sure, though, that you have a work from home policy documented. The HR Management Association has provided a template to
so if you didn't have it before, there's a template.
You also want to make sure that if your employment contract does not cover the full remit of your confidentiality needs, that you will have a separate confidentiality agreement for people to sign, for them to swear to maintain secrets and protect customer confidentiality and so on. Some companies are regulated companies. If you're working from home, that's especially critical. You also have to make sure that the arrangements, for example, let's say you're a company that provides lunch allowance for your employees, or you provide lunch. There's a cook lunch every day in your office, for your 10 people. And it may be part of what you promised in your letter. This is a great opportunity for people to say to people, you know what? I'm going to try to keep you employed. I'm going to pay you for a half day to stay at home, but I can't afford the lunch. Are you willing to waive that arrangement? Because it's another way of saving the cost and making sure that I can keep you employed. Find something in your fridge. Let's work this thing out together. Because at the end of the day, this has to be a partnership for it to work. I think the other thing from a work from home perspective, in my mind, has to be what are the reporting in arrangements. Do you require people to report in? Is there a half day that you have to come in? All of those things need to be specified. You may, for example, say to people, your job doesn't necessarily lend itself to proper measurement as quickly as we'd want to. So can you document arrangements that require people to document what they have done for review? All of those things need to be covered in a policy, or at least explained in a letter. But you really shouldn't allow people to work from home without at least documenting what their arrangements are. But importantly, facilitate it through technology, system changes that allow people to use their own devices, and changes internally that allow people to access the company email, and so on. Those things I think are going to be very important.
Nevada, I'd love you to jump in at this time. Based on some of these options that Michael has put forward to, the conversations that you've been having with SMEs, and just from a practical perspective, what thoughts are you having on some of these options?
No, some of these actually sound amazing because everybody's very much focused on the layoff redundancy
and
issue,
not the options.
And not necessarily options, the fears about that. So the whole idea of the reduced hours or shared work, the whole idea of the rotation, because actually the rotation, that is not something we've heard the reduced hours before. Rotation of the job is not something we've heard before.
Yes.
So that's kind of interesting that somebody could be on for 2 weeks, off for 2 weeks, and somebody else is on for 2 weeks, off for 2 weeks. The reassignment of the contract that you also talked about. One of the concerns with the work at home, just speaking honestly, which we asked as one of the questions, interestingly, most people thought it would not have been an issue. Some have raised the issue of the work at home. Is the employee as productive? Are they working? Are they watching Netflix? How much times are they getting up to go to the fridge? Now, we have found that maybe even employees recognize that, because what happens when you're at the workplace, even if you don't have a hovering workplace, there's a way in which we are monitoring each other. If I'm watching Netflix at work, even if the boss don't see, you who sit next to me see. So I'm going to be hypersensitive about what I'm doing.
Yes.
In a home situation now, all this other stuff can happen. And there's really an issue about maintaining a kind of productivity in the absence of the subtextual monitoring of the work environment.
Yes.
So what I liked about Michael's idea is that, right, if your job has clear outputs, for example, if I'm a salesperson, if I'm not selling, it's very clear, I'm not happy.
Exactly.
So if a job doesn't have clear outputs, the idea of documenting how I've spent my day. So at the end of the day, for example, sending an email that said, today I did these are the things that I actually accomplished. To therefore try and proactively ensure that your boss knows that you're actually gainfully employed and productive. Because remember, what I'm hearing also from Michael is the onus is not only on the employer.
It's a two-way street.
It's a two-way street. So as an employee, make sure your boss knows what you're doing. The other thing I could imagine with some of the work sharing is, are there other responsibilities that you could take on that you didn't have before?
Yes.
So maybe I'm actually good with numbers, but I was not the accountant, or I was not the finance person. Or maybe I'm good at calling people and I need to collect, and so maybe I start to be the person to collect the receivables.
Yes.
Right? Which is something I could do from
home. Or I could
home.
say that I know that the customers are trying to call into the business.
Yes.
I will make my number available.
Absolutely.
And I will be almost your call center.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
So, and also, Michael.
That's a great opportunity, I think, that you may scale down your workforce.
Yes.
And rather than 10 people, you may have 3 people, because you don't really want to lose, at least these 3 people, because they are linchpin into your business. And you may say, well, in order for me to justify being able to pay the 3 of you while you're away, here are some things while you're at home and we're not operating. Here are some other things that you could do. The other thing that if you scale down to 50% of your staff and you only have 5 positions rather than 10 positions, what you could do is to say to the 5 people that are left, or the 10 people in total, you know what? These are only 5 jobs. We're going to ask you to agree to group job sharing. So one job is being shared amongst 2 people. It's the same job.
Yes.
But you ask 2 people to do the one job. You still have 10 people employed.
Right.
But you have
the cost of 5.
50% of the position you had before, but 10 people employed sharing 5 jobs. That's what we call job sharing.
Okay.
That's something that can also be considered.
So then these are some important considerations then with having the communication with your employees and collaborating, because as Carla mentioned at the start of our broadcast, your employees know even better than you what's going on with the business.
Absolutely.
They live and breathe it every single day. One of the things that we also want to mention with work from home, as Michael just outlined, if you do not already have it in place, you need to have a work from home policy, a remote working policy. And Hermage, the Human Resource Management Association of Jamaica, has a template available that can be used. And it is also important because you still need to be having some performance management. With all of the uproar and the trying to move and everything, we didn't have a lot of these things in place. Now that things are settling into some kind kind of momentum, it is important to do the backtracking. Do you have the relevant confidentiality agreements in place? What is the policy for working from home? How do you check in? Do you have every morning at 8 o'clock, everybody comes on a Zoom call together? At the end of the week, do you have your employees setting out what they did through the day so you can actually monitor productivity? Because if the business is operating, the business is still operating. So we just have to, where we had gaps before, we have an opportunity to fill some of those gaps. Carla, one of the things too that has come up a lot is this whole consideration of sick leave and vacation leave, and how do they apply during this COVID period, and do we need to be considering any issues around them in this time?
Those are very good questions, but I just want to tie off something before we go there.
Yes.
All of these provisions that Michael was telling us about are very good options, and I wanted 2 points to just let us tie this
Yes,
off.
please.
With this possibility of all of these to keep people in employment given this unprecedentedness is a change to their employment terms and conditions. It could very possibly be. And those things can't be changed unilaterally. There should be, just the same way the conversation is going on, that there is an agreement given the circumstances. Now, I would wholeheartedly recommend that those changes, when and if agreed to, are documented. Because the vagaries of our memory, sometimes we don't remember what happened when the whole thing is over. And it's usually, unless it is at the end of the day we want to continue on this road, the likely possibility is that you may revert to where you are. So have it in writing. So if you're going to add things to the role and responsibility, while you take away some things, document it. So that at the end of the day, there's no, fog.
Yes.
So that is always important, because an employer is not under contract law able to by themselves unilaterally
make a decision.
Yeah. Okay. And I think people, that point that Carla is making is very, very important, because we have a particular way sometimes that we just talk about the things and we mention them and nobody never remember which date it was mentioned, and we say, no man, but we did say that, but it's not written anywhere, and it is difficult for us then to apply these things because we never write it down. So write them down. So Carla is going to tell us a bit about sick leave and vacation.
All right. So the sick leave now is governed by the holidays with pay order, right? And it provides you with, again, a minimum standard, 2 normal working weeks.
What it named the holidays with pay?
Order.
Okay.
Under the Holidays with Pay Act. Both the same piece of law deals with vacation and sick leave.
Okay.
And again, minimum standards.
Yes.
So 2 normal working weeks. Remember now, if your normal working weeks is 6 days, that's the normal. Some people put on 10 days sick leave. It's normal working weeks.
Okay.
Right? So you would have your 14 days or whatever the normal working week is.
Yeah.
Now the sick leave is if you are ill. If you're not sick, sick leave doesn't apply. As simple as it appears. You have some of us who say, I drop a sick day. It doesn't
it's
work.
It's for when you're sick.
Right?
Does it count if a child is sick? Or it's only for you?
It's for you,
for you.
Only? Okay. So if my child is sick, it is not relevant. Not relevant for the...
That's more compassionate leave,
a
special day.
Casual or special or so on.
But that's a good question, because
So if you are ill because of the COVID, or any other illness that comes in between, during this period, you can have your sick leave become applicable. Now, of course, just to run through that, if you're sick on day 1, you should inform your employer that you are sick as soon as possible on day 1. You can go up to 3 days without
a doctor's
certificate. If you return to work on day 4, that you don't require to bring your medical certificate. If you go past day 4,
you have to have.
You bring your medical certificate to certify your leave.
So if for example you have contracted COVID, you need to be reaching out to your employer to indicate and also to get the medical certificate. But I'm sure our viewers, please send in your questions. We know people are sharing their various experiences. We have the experts online. Send in any questions that you have on any of these issues that have come up. So Carla, if I have been quarantined,
yes,
is that sick leave? What kind of leave is that? Or is just quarantine a
That's
quarantine?
just quarantine. You know, like our friends over from Cornpeace in Clarendon.
Yes.
Because of the nature of what had happened there, and the experts in medical, you know, the medical field have said, listen, we have to, all the persons in this community, we have to keep you quarantined for a particular period, so you know, reduce the risk of you infecting others.
Yes.
You are then on quarantine by virtue of this particular aspect, but you may very well not be ill.
Yes.
So can I get sick leave or no?
Or what?
Oh, no.
So if I am not, but hold on, but this has to be clear. If I am not able to go to work, so I live in Cornpeace, I work in Kingston. I am not able to go to work because the government has shut down my whole area on what can I claim anything from.
All right, so the first thing you do,
Yes.
advise your employer.
Yes.
This is my situation. You can have some weird situations. So my auntie lives in Cornpeace and I
Yes.
went there for the weekend. But by virtue of what happened,
I
or I
can't.
was off on vacation, I can't leave.
Yes.
So you have to advise your employer what has happened.
Yes.
Now, a couple of things. If by the nature of what you are doing, you are able to work remotely,
Yes.
then that is an option that could be examined. But if your job is being the cashier, you can't cash from Cornpeace.
Right. Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yes.
In such a case, then the employer, having been advised, can look at some other options that may be available to see if the person can continue to be paid. So for example, if they have a provision that you can have some special leave, for example, that they could put towards, you know, you could have that time off assigned as special leave and you continue to get paid.
So you can continue to get paid,
Right?
yes.
Or, for example, if a person has vacation leave to their credit and wish to apply for it, to say, okay, I can't come in, but I want to apply because I want to continue to earn during this period. Or, in other cases, listen, there is nothing that the employer could do, so but they would want to keep them in employment. Now remember, you know, it's a wage work bargain. You work, you offer your service, I pay. So you could also, an employer could also have that person on no paid leave, so it doesn't break their employment, but given the particular circumstances, an employer, unless they are able to finance that, wouldn't be in a position to pay if you have not been coming in to provide the service. But you could have them...
And they're not legally required to either.
No.
Okay,
No,
right.
they're not.
Yes.
Unless some other law is passed.
Understood.
So they can keep them in employment, so they haven't been you know, set to abandon their job, for example.
Right.
So they'll keep them on no paid leave, but so for the period they are out, whilst they are still on the books,
Yes.
they may not be paid.
Okay.
Understood.
Now for the vacation leave, Rochelle, the vacation again, 2 normal working weeks up to year 9. And year 10 onwards, 3 normal working weeks.
Okay.
That's what is the provision. Now, again, minimum standards. You can have other places that provide more.
But again, is the floor of rights.
Yes.
Right? So now, in such a time as this, Jamaican law provides that an employer cannot send someone on leave. You can use it as a disciplinary measure, so take your leave because you have a disciplinary. Same way, the law and the cases that have come out from the courts have said this is a benefit to the employee.
So you can't force somebody to go on vacation leave.
But in these circumstances, because if you are, encouraging that good communication and you set
and we're collaborating,
happening,
yes.
If the employee, says, I would like to apply and access my leave, no.
Yes.
I would encourage any employer to consider that because that is something that would have hopefully been already accrued as something that is to be, payable.
So that may be another option
Correct.
that could be discussed.
Correct. So that they can be off. But if they're on vacation, they're on vacation. So you can call them outside of what would be normal. So they're off You have some people who may say, listen, I want my vacation. I expect that COVID in December is going to not be around, and I would like to be able to access my leave. Then I don't want to apply for it. You cannot force them to.
Okay.
Right?
So you may not like the response, but you still cannot force them.
Yes, and you know, again, with good communication, you're able to do that. And I've seen, you know, since this has happened, that is the first step that has occurred in our circumstance. In other countries in the Caribbean, the law says if you give people notice, you can send them off. But in our jurisdiction, that's not how the case law or the, you know, the legislation, the law itself.
But you actually bring up some good points there, Carla, about things that can be considered as amendments and little changes that need to be made to the law in the going forward. But again, we almost need, we would have had to experience this kind of circumstance to understand the various gaps that exist. Nevada, I want to bring you in at this time.
Yes.
You've heard the various options from Michael and also some of the considerations that Carla has put forward. From an SME perspective, what's going through your head now as to what are the real options, and are there real options that SMEs can use?
I absolutely think so. This from as I sort of put my SME hat on, I've definitely heard a lot of suggestions that may not have occurred in the may not have occurred to most SMEs. Remember what's happening, right? We always go back to this. This is a balancing act for the SMEs. How much cash do I have?
Yes.
How much cash is coming in? How many workers am I trying to keep on my employ? And for how long can I actually keep them unemployed while the situation continues?
Yes.
And it is a balancing act with all of those things. So in some ways, you know that, and every SME knows this, right? There's that conversation that you have with yourself late at night where you have a piece of paper and you write down. And literally it's a thing where you say, John, Rochelle, Bob, this, that, right? And the current business situation. Now, what are my options? And in each case, you know, Michael talked about the 3 people I cannot lose.
Yes.
So you make a circle around those 3 and say, come hell or high water, I must protect this group.
Yes.
Right? Then you have the other group of people that you say, boy, let me try for a little, but if things get really tough, they're in the thing. Also, what we hear though, some of the SMEs will use the opportunity because you always have a few slaggers in the company, right? So you use the opportunity to say, boy, COVID.
Long time we did one run you.
Exactly. But I'm going to just use this opportunity now to like clear the space. Let me keep it now to that core team that is productive and moving, and whether doing part-time work, full-time, part-time, shared work, whatever it is, that becomes a
and it's
dynamic.
important because, Nevada, that's a critical point that you have raised, because there are some organizations that will utilize COVID as a time to cull their staff complement. And it is not just a situation where you can unilaterally reduce people's pay, just send people home without more. The application of the law still comes in. If redundancy is due, redundancy is still going to be due. And also that there are certain provisions in the law that deal with things like unfair dismissal, unfair termination. You can't just be sending people home abstractly. But Nevada has made a point that you do have to sit down with that piece of paper and really look at your staff complement. And you may not have been doing this before. You may not have really been thinking about, what do my people actually do in the day? Do they work a full 8-hour day, or is this role really a half-day role? And it is now an opportunity to rejig the role, because it may be that you really only work half of the day, and what I need to be giving you, because on the other end I have these other things to be done and nobody's doing it. I can add this to your role with the relevant contractual provisions.
And you know that's important, Rochelle, because all of those various options that Michael gave us is really falling under the umbrella of what we call flexible work arrangements. And in 2014, our parliamentarians implemented a piece of legislation that has cleared the way for our businesses, large or small, to contemplate and to work flexibly. Yes? And with that, you can look at some of those options, the job rotations, the job share, and so on. Staggered work hours, for example, to put in place. So
can you remind people the name of that law?
So it is the Employment Flexible Arrangements Miscellaneous Provisions Act.
No, what is
So we call it the Flexi Time Act.
The Flexi Time Act.
Yes. And so what that means is that you could now use this opportunity to take a pragmatic look at your business and to see what works, what doesn't work, and use it to do all of that, and to rest assured that in Jamaica the provisions are there for you to set up in that way.
The other thing that we've heard from some of the SMEs is what the new buzzword, what the digitization of the business. This may be at times, so for example, you have 3 people, 4 people working in customer service, and you've never used artificial intelligence or a machine to answer some of those calls. But in the reduction, potentially, you might find that machine could be a substitute for man in some cases. So one of the things that some of the what I call the medium size of the SME version that they're looking at, right, is what are the various functions in the business and which of these functions potentially could be digitized. So that is also a question that gets raised now. Michael had something to...
Yeah, Michael, because we have some questions from the viewers. So Michael, we're going to just take Michael and then we take some questions.
Right, so I wanted to say that, you know, again, if I go back to the communication element of it, it's going to be important that, you know, these people be brought into the conversation. It should be frank and open and honest so that we are all clear. You know, COVID has certainly created a need for people to buy into the idea that we are employer and employee, we are all in this thing together. So it's important that there is this honest conversation. Here are what the facts are. We're not a public company, but here are the numbers. Here's what we think we may have to do. What do you think about it? Do you have another suggestion? You know, somebody may say, you know what, boss, this thing that I was doing for you as an employer, you think you could give me a loan and I'll go and start a little business and I will supply you with services and other people. I'm still going to work for you, but other people will pay me too, you know? So you're releasing some of your people to become independent service providers. You still have them. And they're going to be loyal to you because, you know, you're the one who helped them to start. So at least you have now found a way to outsource, but it is your own people that you're now outsourcing to because you trust them. So, you know, it's an opportunity, I think, in this environment to release some new independent service providers. And you know you're going to be getting good stuff from them. The other thing I want to quickly say is, you know, if you have to talk to people who are on fixed term contracts who, you know, they haven't gotten to 104 weeks, and you want to break the contract, well, you know, because you're trying to help, but you could break the contract, and I know Carla, who I work with for many years, is going to jump on you on this one. But if you break the contract and issue a new contract for a different kind of work because scope has gone down. And this may be at 50% of what they were being paid before, but it's a new contract. So if the same person has to work for half the pay for 40 hours per week, well, what you could do rather than pay them monthly, you could pay them every 2 weeks. So that now this reduced pay is being paid more regularly.
So they have a cash flow.
They have a cash flow. Nice.
And it's a new contract, Obviously, if the people are entitled to redundancy, that creates another spin because, you know they're fixed term contract employees, they are entitled to redundancy. I mean, I have a view about this 1 week break. I don't think it can stand up to scrutiny, but I'm not an attorney, so I won't comment on that.
I have some questions here that have come in from our audience. Andre Miller. Carla, Andre is asking, for layoffs, are employers required to have the consent of the employee for a layoff? Good question.
Not necessarily, no, because the nature of layoff is that you're not dismissed, you're not terminated. And if it is that there's nothing for them to do, there really isn't anything else that would happen. I guess in a technical kind of way, if the employer doesn't provide the work, then there could be a quote-unquote breach of contract. But given the specifics of what's going on, I really believe reasonableness is what really should be at play here. Yeah. And that provision was put in the law to protect, you know, to create that kind of little cushion.
Like a bridge.
A breathing room,
yes.
you know, temporarily.
So it doesn't require consent. So it actually doesn't require consent, Andre. I have another question here from Suzanne Donald. Suzanne is asking, how is maternity leave dealt with if it overlaps with the layoff period? We were talking about this very issue, Carla, which is not dealt with in the legislation, but if you can just give us a view. Yes. And this is just a view.
Yes. Well, Suzanne, thank you so much. You're one for the very challenging questions. So the truth is, the Maternity Leave Act speaks to, you know, all the provisions that would need to be met. And in these circumstances, if we had a redundancy, things would have been much clearer.
Yes.
You know, you would, if a redundancy occurred whilst the person was just about going off or off, then you would have had to keep them until the end of the redundancy, until the end of the maternity leave,
and then make them redundant.
You would seek at that point to see if you can find alternatives, and if not, then the redundancy would begin.
Yeah. But you would still have to pay for that maternity leave.
Correct, yes. And that's the point. Most of the layoff is without pay.
Yes.
Right? So there's no doubt that if you had been eligible, the maternity leave would have been payable. But when the layoff intersects, and the mere fact is that the layoff is looking at people not being paid or paid, you know, or given some small amount.
Yes.
The question is, which one would
supersede? Yes.
Maternity leave is earlier in time, 1979.
Yeah.
The layoff provisions came into the law in 1986. And it doesn't appear to me, and the matter did give me some cause for pause in terms of which one would take precedence.
But let me ask you a question though. With all of these things, isn't the maternity leave something I am already owed? Meaning, so it precedes, although it's happening now, it is because I have worked for the company for a particular amount of time that maternity leave is owed. So in fact, the company is simply paying that which already was owed.
The maternity leave comes in, and it's not something that you would pay up front. You're off, and you get
and you still get paid while you're off on leave.
My suggestion is that, given all that is happening, the employer, because of the sensitivity and the nature of what maternity leave is, you don't want our mothers to be overly distraught during this particular period.
Understood,
generally speaking, you know, has the capacity to do all sorts of things, postpartum, all kinds of things.
Yes.
So my recommendation is that if there is someone who is on maternity or is already right on the cusp and given the notice to go off, look to see if there's any way you can
pay that. That maternity.
That is my recommendation.
But the thing though is that the reality is that it is not clearly dealt with in any other legislation. So this is another thing.
Another thing that has to be, interesting.
Reform.
Yes.
I see a comment here from Tanya Neversole, and Tanya is talking about, she says there's a gap in the law as the employer will acknowledge that redundancy is due but will note the amount but doesn't have a specific time to pay. So this comment I think came out of a discussion earlier. When does the redundancy need to be paid? And the legislation does not set a time when the redundancy is to be paid. And this also, Karen Wilson missed earlier what triggers the redundancy. So Carla, in 30 seconds, can you just remind us of what triggers a redundancy? Because I see that comment coming in.
So total cessation of the business.
What that mean, Carla? You're so bright.
Lockdown.
Okay.
Lockdown, totally closed down.
Yes.
Or the reduction of the need for the business for a particular role. So you can have a number of persons doing the same thing, so that could be reduced. So if you have 10 cashiers, you go down to 5, or the particular role that the person is in
no longer exists.
No longer exists.
So for this purpose, we leave out the medical redundancy for the time.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
By the way, medical redundancy, I want to know, if it can be proved that I caught COVID at work, does that trigger the medical redundancy?
That is if you can't
Work
at the end
again.
of the day, continue to be employed.
Okay.
So so it's not just that you got sick.
Because of the work.
Medical redundancy usually chips in if, for instance, you had a disability arising from you've had a fall at work, that kind of thing. I see Leisha Gay Taylor asking the question, how can you stipulate the days for sick leave? Do you mean the number of days with pay? So if you could just remind us how sick leave is triggered.
Okay, so if you fell ill today, and you call in, boss, I don't feel good, right? You have met the requirement for the law for the first day. Then if you go 1, 2, 3 from that first day, if at the 4th day you return to work, no need for a sick leave certificate, you continue, the 3 days are noted.
Yes.
Right? After that, you would continue. So the truth is, sick days don't stop with working days. You don't stop feeling sick on
a
Friday afternoon.
Yes. And you resume the illness.
You resume on Monday.
So if you have 7 days sick leave and you got a 7-day sick leave certificate from the doctor on Monday, it actually is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and you come back to work Monday. It's not that it stops on Friday and then Monday you start sick again for the other 2 days.
Some folks had some challenges.
I did not know this. I would have assumed 7 days, 7 working days.
And
so you recovered Saturday and Sunday.
Saturday and I went out. That Monday I sick again.
Maternity leaves are actually,
regular
calendar, including the weekend.
You see, that was such an interesting question.
Very
interesting question. And it's also important for us to note too that the issue of the advertisements have been saying, if you feel ill, don't go into work, stay at home. So I feel ill and I've stayed at home. What is my responsibility to my employer? Because I'm having a dry cough, I don't know if it's COVID, what am I supposed to do?
Well, firstly, you're sick, right? So, the first thing you do, call in as soon as it's practicable, right? As soon as you can. Because some people get in a coma and you can't do it immediately, yes? So, once you advise them on day 1 or as close to it thereafter, then you keep on monitoring. You keep on saying, I am feeling better, I can come back, or I can resume working at home.
Yes.
Yes.
But again, it's a communication. And one of the things we have been stressing is communication requires a two-way street. So it is actually a dialogue with employer and employee.
Sorry, Rochelle, there was something that another SME, or actually 2 different SMEs had raised with me as well. Is there, or should there not be, and again, this is a question to the government bodies, an entire rethinking of the labor law because of special circumstances, whether because of a hurricane, because of the pandemic, and so on, that just says, because very much so, all of what you've outlined is what we call labor law under normal circumstances. We are now in abnormal circumstances. And the question is, should there be some tabling of a different temporary set of labor laws that should exist because of what we're going through? Is that something we should be raising with the government? Is that something that could happen? Or is that just, pie in the sky foolishness?
All right. That's I've been in my bonnet for a long time. We have a number of employment laws.
Yes.
And they're spread out across, different pieces. A lot of people, that's why you need people like me, because you don't know how to interface with everything.
Yes.
So one thing that we could do to start that process would be to amalgamate or put all of them together.
Because there are various pieces of
legislation. That's the first thing.
Yes.
In doing that now, you can contemplate what else we could do to enhance in situations like this. So, for example, in some other Caribbean countries, there is a thing called unemployment insurance. Right?
Yes.
They have it in some first world countries as well.
Yes.
And it's it's pegged to your national insurance, so it's contributory. And for a particular period of time, if you are unable to work, you can make an application to receive a certain amount of benefits.
Okay.
Right? So that is something that is not rocket science. It's been used otherwise, and it's not just big countries. Barbados have it, Bahamas have it, and we can contemplate that. Right? So the other piece now is to look at the leave provisions. So it doesn't have to be COVID. It could be a very bad hurricane. It could be an earthquake. It could be a specific thing that only impacts a specific place. So whereas right now the only leave provisions that are provided for in the law are talking about sick leave and vacation leave, we could contemplate a legislation, and given our, the fact that we are in the hurricane belt and so on, that in such circumstances, how are employers to treat with people being off work in specified circumstances? If it's going to be that they're going to continue on in employment with a specific, number of amount of pay could be complemented by the unemployment insurance. And so if people know that, there could be a national fund, a company fund, or anything like that, so that persons can know that at a bare minimum, we can expect this amount of little coverage until we get over. So I do agree that there is a need to contemplate
a national,
because we're talking about a lot of different legislation. We're talking about the Employment Redundancy Act, we're talking about the Minimum Wage Act, the Holidays with Pay Act, the Maternity Act, then we have a labor code. So there's so this is in fact an opportune time for government to consider a review of the employment and labor legislation, to amalgamating them, and this will help us certainly to see some of the gaps, because we don't see some of the gaps because we're working on
with too many different
pieces.
So
we're getting to that wrap up time, and this has been some great conversation. So I want to just kind of go around the room. Michael, you're in the room, so we're going around the room. And just to have some closing thoughts from you on how employers and employees can navigate this time.
I think this is a great opportunity for employers and employees to forge a partnership by sitting around a table and agreeing how are we going to navigate what's before us. Because I don't think that unilateral decision making is not going to engender loyalty, even for people who you've kept on reduced arrangements. They may not feel good enough about it because of the way you handle it. So it's an opportunity for a partnership to be developed. I want to make one comment which we missed. Insurance companies in some countries provide what we call short-term income protection policies, where companies, it's unemployment insurance, but it's not so much unemployment. What it does is it allows a company to buy a policy that covers an employee who is ill for 3 months up to 2 years, for example. And so what an employer does is that once you've gone beyond your typical sick leave, what's called intermittent days, then you can be sick for another 3 months or up to 2 years. By the time you get past 90 days, it may be you can only claim 65% of your pay. So I think it's an opportunity for the industry to look at how going forward can we support employers. But you're pooling the risk, so it's cheaper for everybody to buy this thing. So in the absence of the typical unemployment insurance, this is dealing with illness, because I think that's a critical issue here. Illness related to isolation because you're suspected. So those two partnerships that is based upon strong communication, and we look at ways of innovating around the absences that may be related to pandemics in the future.
Thanks a lot for that, Michael. Can I also bring in at this time Carla? Carla, can we have some closing words from you?
Well, I have to echo a lot of what Mike said in terms of appreciating that an employment contract is not like your regular commercial contract, right? It is more of a relationship that the law is helping to regulate.
Okay.
Yes.
And by virtue of that, if you can find, you know, areas of agreement between the parties, nothing beats that. The law is a minimum standard. And you know, without saying that I'm becoming political, the law is not supposed to look as a shackle. The law is a minimum standard, a guide, and you know, get good advice.
Yes.
Never underestimate the value of good advice.
So no, it's not the time to quarrel with lawyers. I noticed you may have seen a little surprise on my face a while ago. I see that the president of the private sector organization of Jamaica, Mr. Keith Duncan, is joining us online. Welcome, Keith.
Thank you, Rochelle. Thank you, Rochelle. I really had to call in to really acknowledge the team and the panel today. Carla, you did mystify what is, as you said, laws that are all over the place that need to really be integrated. And that was an excellent question from the SME Nevada. Why don't we just make this thing as simple as possible? That whole unemployment insurance thing and just making benefits really simple and clear would make, you know, having to come up with a program like the CARE program, which I think we're going to talk about next week, right? Which would really make things like this, you know, less of a one-time intervention, but something that is almost standard and a part of our day-to-day way about how we go about business, you know.
Yes.
So I really want to, Michael and Carla, you are really good, man. Some fabulous suggestions, Michael, and recommendations you made about outsourcing to your own, you know, employee, and you know, really finding a way to share the burden, so that we can see how we can help businesses and to really navigate through this really tough period. We know that the IMF Managing Director had just come out and said that this will be the worst recession since the Great Depression.
Wow.
So we know we have a tough road ahead. It's going to take all hands coming together, partnership between employer and employee, working together to really move us forward. You know, so really, the PSOJ is committed, and I'd like to acknowledge Rochelle, yourself, and Nevada being our project architect, and you being our CEO for the PSOJ AFFD project, for really driving this effort. It is really adding a lot of value, not only to the MSMEs, but also to the wider business community. So thanks a whole lot. I have my JMB HR manager online right now, and she's really informative. This is really, you know, so I really had to call in to acknowledge everybody. Thank you very much, and keep up the good work. And you know what I mean? We're all standing for Jamaica, powerful Jamaica. We seem to be doing a pretty decent job with managing and containing the spread, flattening the curve. You know what I mean? And keeping economic activity going so that we can keep people employed. Let's continue to deepen the effort and really move Jamaica forward. And we're going to emerge on the other side of this powerful and strong. Build some new muscles.
Yes.
So thank you all.
Thanks a lot, Keith. And I don't think we could have put it as well as Keith just did. And Carla, again, we thank you for your expertise. Michael, we thank you for your expertise. You know, one of the good things is that we always say all the experts are already in Jamaica. So we have them all here. And next week, we're so pleased to have you joining us every week. And every week we get more and more persons joining. Please share the program and continue following us. Next week, we're going to be discussing the very important CARE program. We're going to encourage you that the issues that you are having, that you send those issues in, but also the success that you're having, we also want to hear about that. So next week, we're going to get in-depth into the CARE program. So we're really looking forward to having you again here next week, Thursday at 4 p.m. on Facebook Live. Please remember to like, to share and comment, and we're asking you to have a very happy and holy Easter. This is really a time for us to reflect and to contemplate, but also we get an opportunity to stop and remember that despite lockdown, despite curfew, we are getting a chance to reflect. We are still alive. We will emerge from this stronger. And please let us just take a moment now to celebrate our frontline workers, or healthcare workers that are putting themselves on the line every day, who are working long hours to protect us, the police force, the soldiers. And also, we just want to commend the work that our government has been doing. We can see that they've been very proactive. So we will work together. We are Jamaicans, and you know what that means. So we're strong.
That's right.
So see you next week, Thursday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Woo!
Michael, thank you.